Our next guest is Joe Jordan, and it's very special to me because I wouldn't be here without Joe. He's been a mentor of mine for over 30 years. So, Joe, welcome to Financial Freedom today.
Well, it's great to be here, Tommy. Thanks for having me.
Now, I want you to go back. You've been in the business almost 50 years. How did you get involved in the financial services industry?
Well, I started as a life agent, and then I ran insurance sales at Paine Webber, which was a wirehouse on Wall Street, stock brokerage firm. And then I went to MetLife, and I built their annuity business, had all retail product development, and started their fee-based financial planning unit. So that's kind of how I got started, and that's what I do now as I speak and write.
You've seen a lot change in those 50 years. Kind of tell me some of the changes you've seen.
Well, I can't tell you all of them because there's too many to count, but I looked fundamentally at the concept of what are the three basic drivers of change, okay? And the first one is regulations, the second one is technology, and the third one is demographics. Now, regulations is just something you got to deal with. And by regulations, I also mean taxes, things that a governmental organization imposes upon you. And you just got to hope they don't get too crazy and you deal with them. The second one is technology, and technology is a huge driver of change. And now it's really becoming very preeminent because some people are thinking AI is now going to rival the electrification of the world, you know. So a lot of people are very nervous, you know, about what's going to happen to their jobs, or is it going to go away? And the only thing I would tell you about that is if you're a financial advisor, I don't think that AI is going to take your job, okay? However, I would say that advisors who use AI will take the positions and the jobs of those who do not. So that'll happen. And the third one is demographics. And to me, the demographics is the major change element that we're feeling right now.
So let's dig a little deeper into demographics because it's a big deal. You know, Japan sells more Depends than they sell baby diapers, you know, and China now they're experiencing demographic problems. So let's dig into that.
Well, let's make it simple, okay? If you have a couple age 62 that doesn't smoke, there's a 50% chance one of those people are going to be alive 30 years out. So we've never had a situation ever where for 30 years, you know, people could live 30 years, you know, post-retirement. So that fundamentally changes the landscape.
Now you talk about rethinking retirement in this new age. So talk about this. How do we rethink retirement with people living longer like that?
Well, I call it purpose-driven retirement planning, and I think it's something that's going to be the next evolution of financial services. You know, we've sold products, then we did planning, but planning is very numbers-oriented and what have you. So now we're going to get to the next level, which is the idea of purpose-driven. And what do I mean by that? I think one of the wives of one of the astronauts said it best: if you think going to the moon is hard, try staying home. So all of a sudden, look, in the old days, you retired, you took a boat to Ireland, and then you were dead at 68, so who cared? But now people could live longer in retirement than when they were working. So they got to do something with themselves. You know, they got to make something happen. So I read a book. It's by this guy, Gary Sirac. Gary is in our business, and what he began to notice very subtly was that some of his best clients who were very well off financially did not do well in retirement. They didn't know how to deal with it. They didn't know what to do with themselves because no one brings up the fact that people lose a lot in retirement. You know, they lose routine, they lose identity, they lose purpose. They lose, you know, concepts of being. So it's a major issue, and a lot of times our business is not addressing that, and I think it will in the future.
Now, your book, Living a Life of Significance, kind of ties in with this purpose-driven retirement. So kind of talk about how they overlap.
Well, you know, I did one and then came to this realization. So my book, Living a Life of Significance, was geared towards advisors. I wanted to bring up the idea and the concept that it's very important what we do. We live for others. We do things for others. And I think that encourages people to have courage to do the things that we don't want to do, like face rejection and all that stuff like that. Gary Sirac's book is more in tune with the idea from a client perspective. So I think the two of them come together, and it took a lot of years for one to turn into the other. So, I think that's something that's there. I also read a book by Emily Smith, and she wrote this book, The Power of Meaning. And she described the 4 pillars of living a significant life, which I'll get to a little bit later. But clients need meaning and purpose in retirement on top of being financially secure.
Now, we talk a lot about longevity and longevity being a risk, but it's not just in the U.S. I mean, this is happening worldwide.
It is, and that's the point that I'm so surprised that so many people are missing the boat. There was a Wall Street Journal front page article in May of last year, and what it says is there's not enough babies. So, what does that mean? Is that a big deal? It is. The UN predicted in 2017 that the world population would peak at 11 billion by the end of the century. It's now down to 9 billion by 2060, and it's going to continue to go down. China will get old before it gets rich. They now have 30 million bachelors. Why? Well, they had this one-child policy. There aren't enough age women who have the ability to have babies, and so that's a major problem. So that'll just continue to go down. But it's beyond China. It's, as you said, you brought up Japan and other places like that. The fact of the matter is the population's going down. I have a question for you. Tommy, which country in the world has the most people over 100?
I would have said Japan, but
you would be wrong. Now, it has more per capita, but that's an example of a population that's dropping dramatically. It's the United States.
wow.
And the fact of the matter is we own this for the planet to figure out how to deal with this new environment, which is irreversible and is definitely going to happen. Look, global warming's an issue, but this one is, I think, the real dominant one. So that's something that we have to be, we have to be cognizant in the future. Here's the other thing that's there. 80% of men die married, and 80% of women die single. And even though the United States is better than most because we allow immigration, when they started Social Security, Tommy, 1935, there were like 40 workers to every retiree. Now it's 3, and soon it's going to be 2. So that's going to put a lot of pressure on all of the things that people take for granted when they're sitting down and doing retirement planning.
Now we have inflation that was dead for 30 years, and it's not dead anymore. And inflation can devastate a retiree's purchasing power. So talk about inflation along with this aging.
Well, I could show you all the charts and graphs and all of the things that economists talk about, but I like to keep it simple, 30 years ago, because remember we established 30 years ago already, 30 years ago a stamp cost 32 cents, okay? Now it costs 73. So it's up like over 2.5 times. But the S&P 500 at 30 years ago started the year, it was at 459, and it started this year at 5,800. It's been over 6,000. So that's like over 11 times. So, one of the things that people talk about is the idea of investing long-term in equities, because equities outperform all the time, just not every day. I agree with that. But you know what sometimes doesn't happen in our business? We don't recognize the behavior that people manifest when the market does precisely what it does. All the logic in the world does not overcome people waking up in 2008, recognizing that the S&P is down 58% and they're 66 years old, and they get out and they never recover from that. So one of the things that's out there are a number of products. Equity indexed annuities is one of them, which what it allows for is protection to the downside with some participation to the upside. So my point is this, look, historically, inflation has been around 3%. So most people would be happy if they could just maintain their lifestyle to not get eaten up by inflation. So maybe you don't need 11 or 12%. Maybe you need something, anything above inflation, would be worthwhile.
Longevity, we talked about inflation, but there are other risks in retirement. So kind of cover some of the other risks that you see out there.
Well, the other risks all lend into the one big one, which happens to be the idea of running out of money, And that's the big risk that people have. So running out of money is one. So what do you do about it? One thing I would strongly recommend to everyone, because I did it, delay Social Security until age 70. Most people don't do that. And when you delay from 62 to 70, you wind up getting 76% more. So why wouldn't you want to build that foundation? The foundation has to be, especially living longer, is the idea of having a lifetime income that you can't outlive, and Social Security, is the baseline for that. The other things that happen is the idea that people are afraid when they're managing their own portfolio, their own retirement, because this is the first time in history, that people are responsible for financing their own longer and more expensive retirement. Okay, one of the things is they're concerned about how much to take out, so they don't know how much to take out. And you know the Monte Carlo scenarios that came out and said 4%, and they say this with a straight face. That's a 90% probability of not running out of money, which means you have a 10% probability of running out of money. You wouldn't get on a plane to Vegas if there was a 10% probability you wouldn't there. It's not about the numbers. It's about what happens to people and the decisions that they happen to make. So that's important. They don't know how much to take out, and that's problematic. The other one, it's a relatively new one, is this idea of sequence of returns. And that came from Moshe Milevsky, our friend up in Canada. What he did is he's trying to describe that accumulating money is different from taking money out. And what he did is he constructed two portfolios. One of them has the bad year in the third. The other one has the bad year in the second. So what happens is every 3 years, these portfolios, they're synthetic, every 3 years, those portfolios behave exactly the same. They are equal. They grow at 8% on the accumulation phase. However, if you take money out, the first one lasts 30 years, the second one lasts only 25 years. So that's a whole new risk. And so that's what people have to begin to absorb and to understand, that as they get older, dealing with a lot of these financial concepts, kind of becomes problematic.
What I say is dollar cost averaging in accumulation turns into dollar cost ravaging in distribution. I thought you'd like that one. So
that's a great one.
Joe, we're $36 trillion in debt. The debt's climbing $1 trillion every 85 to 90 days. This year we paid more for interest on the debt than our defense budget. Taxes at some point are going to have to go up. And I know you've talked a lot about how to try to manage that tax risk. Kind of talk about that.
Well, taxes are important because obviously, and it's simple in this country, right? The more you make, the more your taxes go up. It's on steroids when you retire. What happens, because I found this out, when you're retired, your income dictates how much they take from your Social Security to pay for your Medicare. I didn't know that. So what happens is it's almost like another tax, that comes layered on. So that's kind of problematic, and so it's important to know that they pay for Medicare from your Social Security account, which reduces the amount that you get from Social Security. So what are some of the products out there, or what are some of the concepts? What income, let's put it this way, what income is not taxable? Well, believe it or not, tax-free loans from a life insurance policy happen to be tax-free. And if they supplement some of your income in retirement, that will lower what they call your IRMA calculation, which means you're going to get more of your Social Security back. So that's one element that does it. The other one is, and believe me, reverse mortgages. Now, I used to break out the crucifix and the garlic every time that I heard about a reverse mortgage. But we have trillions of dollars that are tied up into real estate for people that are over 65. And you know what I like about it? It's ecumenical. It just doesn't deal with rich people. You get some guy bought a house for $30,000. 30 years ago, it's worth $450,000. He now has access to tax-free money to improve his life, to do things that perhaps he couldn't have before, to pay for medical expenses, to do all of those things. But the beauty of that is that that money comes out on a tax-free basis. And so if that's tax-free, it doesn't affect your IRMA calculation, which means that the amount they spend on Social Security goes down. And then the last one is the whole idea of a Roth IRA. And for those who don't know, a Roth IRA is an IRA, but the proceeds when they come out are tax-free. And you don't have to start taking them out at age 72. So The only rub is that you have to take the money out now and pay the current taxes. That ain't such a bad rub, you know, because right now, you know, everyone complains about what the president did with his tax benefits, right? Well, now you have, you know, the standard deduction. The standard deduction is $30,000 for a couple age 65 and up. It's $33,000. Listen to this. The amount of money under the current tax law, which expires this year, unless it gets, you know, renewed, up to $427,000 can come out and be taxed at a federal level of 20%. You're never going to see, and that's what you talked about. Your leading question was the idea of taxes ultimately have to come up to pay 20% on money that you would take out, and then you would stick into a never taxable account. I mean, right now IRAs and all those things are always taxable. So you have a partner, and either you take it out or you leave it to someone. The Uncle Sam can change the you know the playing field, and you wind up with higher taxes. So I think you should really seriously contemplate that. I think that affects a lot of people, and they can take it out. Now, hopefully they extend them, and if they extend them, they can do it over time, take the money out to always a tax-free type of environment, and I think.
Joe, I want to go back to something you said. You know, you said 80% of men die married, 80% of women die single, and I think 70% of those women end up firing the financial advisor that was advising their husband. So this really is a women's issue because they live longer than everybody else. So what are some of the things we can share with women on how to retire, you know, more successfully?
Well, I think one of the things we should really talk to the advisors to make certain that they treat the women on a parity. You know, it's like what do they call it?
Mansplaining.
Mansplaining. You know, so I think there's a lot of that happens, and so I do think it's important that you bring the women in closer to this thing, and they really should have an understanding because 9 times out of 10 they're going to be the ones who are going to be alone. You know, and so that's a big issue. That's why I think it's important women think about this as a career. And the other part of it is then also the idea of living longer. They're on steroids when it comes to that because their life expectancies are dramatically higher. So as I said before, the foundational pieces for someone thinking about retirement should be you should have at least enough guaranteed lifetime income that you can't outlive to pay your fixed expenses. I mean, if you match towards that, you'd be in pretty good shape. I mean, obviously, you have to avoid what inflation does to you, and so you might have to get more aggressive. But we have so many more tools than we had. I go back 50 years, you know, it was one or the other, and so that's important. So I think we've come a long way relative in the financial services marketplace to be understanding that. And I have a piece, it's a series of stories, and it's Life of Significance, which is what I talk about, a woman's perspective. And it has all these stories from women, and they're just dramatic. And it talks about women in the business, the impact they've had on others, and they're just dramatic stories. And I think that's something that we really, you know, need to promote heavily.
We talked about living a life of significance, and you were going to talk about those 4 pillars. So let's get into that.
It's belonging, purpose, storytelling, and transcendence. And belonging. With the rise of social media, the decline and the rise of secularization, the decline of religion and family values, people have never felt more isolated and alone. Yale did a study and found out the more people use Facebook, the worse they feel. Nobody posted the dog died or, you know, the car blew up or I had a lousy day. It's all this idyllic stuff, you know, that nobody you know, thinks is real. And so that's a major issue. Then FOMO, the fear of missing out. So people put their whole self-worth predicated on how many likes they get. That's manipulative, okay? The second one is the idea of purpose, and purpose requires a commitment that's greater than what's in it for you. I mean, it's the fundamental Judeo-Christian values that the country is built on. We're here for others, and here's an example to do that. The next one is storytelling, and all wisdom comes from specific human experiences. All right, stories give people an idea of what is actually happening. It connects them. It also has the ability to break apart some of their hardcore values. They might come in thinking one way, but it can get distorted or changed by people using stories. And the last thing is transcendence. And that's the out-of-body experience you get when you did something worthwhile for someone. I'll tell you a story, okay? This was at $1 Million Roundtable. And I was there, and I took a picture with Fred Bellman. And Fred is there, he's got this stupid hat on, because he's a volunteer. So the way people can see who's volunteering is they wear the cowboy hat or something stupid like that. And so he's from the Middle East. He's from Lebanon. Right, yeah. So and that's right, you were there, and I was there. Holy smokes! Yeah. Where's the helmet? So anyway, I said, Fred, you know, were you affected? A lot of people don't know. In 2020, there was this massive explosion. It took out part of the city. A lot of people got killed, and it was fertilizer from a Russian ship. And I said, were you affected by it? He says, no. No, but one of my clients jumped in front of his wife, and it charred glass, took his neck out. The guy's dying. You know what his last words were? Talk to Fred, he'll take care of you. Talk to Fred, he'll take care of you. It's just another day at the office. You know, Oprah Winfrey didn't show up. It wasn't televised all over the place. But this is the type of business that financial advisors do. And he understood that, you know, from a standpoint of what he did, and that he had this relationship with the person dying, and his last thing was what Fred had done for him. Now, if that ain't a significant life, I don't know what is. And the beauty of being in this business, so I guess I'm advertising the business a little bit, why not, is the fact that you'll have that impact on people.
Now, Joe, there's a question that you like to ask seniors, and go ahead and give the audience that question.
Well, I found that a lot of times, you know, financial. Look, I had to introduce financial planning to MetLife. I didn't know anything about it, you know, and then I bumped into Nick Murray, and Nick Murray he's my mentor, and he gets up, and I'm going to look at charts and graphs. He's talking about managing people's behavior. I said, wow, this is really something. So. What I found was that a lot of the questions we ask are very sterile. It deals with numbers, and it really doesn't connect with people. So the idea of the artistry is the idea of connecting with people. And I think there's a great thing to say, because people say, what are your goals? People haven't thought about what the hell their goals are. They're trying to, you know, get through the rest of the week. But one penetrating question you can ask that people would think about would be, well, let's face it, going forward, do you want to be rich? Or would you rather have a guarantee you'll never be poor? 8 out of 10 people will pick the second one. They don't want to be rich. And so that's something that's there. And if you can make people feel better, they'll adhere to the advice that you give them with the right types of products, and tell them you're going to steer them right. And we really need to tell people that this whole world that we're coming at is going to be radically different from the one we're in now.
Joe, we've talked about a lot of things. Are there a few other things that you kind of want to share with the audience today?
I guess the message that I wanted to get across was this demographic issue is the major issue that the planet faces, okay? That we're going to wind up potentially with more people old and retired than young people. They're the ones who pay all of the bills. So it's like what Nick Murray says, it's yo-yo. You're on your own. So I think you also have to take a look at the idea of having a foundational piece of lifetime guaranteed income, funded first by Social Security, then any pension plan if you happen to have it, and then probably going out and buying what we call immediate annuities. I know they sometimes people don't appreciate them as much, but it pays an income that people have been accustomed to, and it does it forever. The other things that they have to do is be cognizant as they get older that they might develop health issues. And some of those products, I talked about a life insurance policy, I talked about annuities, have living values that are associated with it, you know, that could work towards it. And the other thing which I think is important, know that you have to have meaning and purpose in retirement. Don't think playing golf and smoking cigars lasts 6 months. You're going to have to figure that out and do it.
So, Joe, A lot of people don't know this, but you speak all over the world. You and I have shared stages all over the world on some of the biggest stages, and I know there's people out there that have meetings and they need a speaker. They want somebody inspirational. I think you'd be perfect for that. How can they get a hold of you?
Well, they can go on my website. It's pretty self-evident, josephjordan.com. And when you get in there, you can see all of the different things that I do. I also talk to clients too, because I'm finding this fascinating. They're really everybody knows someone who retired and is now out there yelling, "Get off my lawn!" You know, and so they're beginning to catch on to it, because it took years for people to begin to understand, as people live longer, what happens to them. You have to have a meaningful and purposeful life. And the one thing I would say too, if you're a young person, you want to get into a business that has a great future, financial services is it, because we're going to have a ton of people who are going to have to be self-reliant, and you guys can, and if you join this business, you can help them.
Thank you, Joe, for attending, and thank you, everybody, for another episode of Financial Freedom with Tom Hagen.